Hi, I am Paige Detman, Chief Education Evangelist at Meteor Education.
Good morning. I am Boris Serdar, Design Principal at NAC Architecture.
Thank you for joining us. Our conversation today focuses on pro-social learning ecosystems, where learning is a collaborative journey. Pro-social learning ecosystems are designed to prepare our current and future generations of students with skills that they will need to thrive in our rapidly transforming world. Students in this classroom learn in a traditional ecosystem. The teacher at the front of the room is disseminating information one way to quiet and compliant students. When I talked with these students after class, they admitted that their brains were turned off during the lecture. Daydreaming had taken over their minds. Now, all of us hold strong mental models of the way we learn.
Sarah Goldhagen's book about the built environment is an excellent guide and an excellent document how built environment shapes our behavior and how it influences our actions and our reaction to everything we inhabit. But it also gives a great insight in the psychological connection to it and how we are still sometimes connected to our habits that may affect our behavior and actions.
Sure. And Sarah explains that the way we've traditionally done business leads to habituating to that pattern, even though we know we'd be better off with something else. So why does the traditional model of education persist? People's beliefs are strong about the status quo of traditional education. The images people carry in their minds are often of their own traditional school experience. And our educators also have in their minds the way they were trained in college and how they have taught throughout their successful careers. Have you ever heard someone say, hey, those straight rows worked for me, so why won't they work for today's kids? Absent a better why, it is really easy to rationalize that the way we have always taught is the best option for serving today's students. But there is a better why. Today's students are digital natives. In fact, they are the first generations to grow up with social media from birth. The photos on this slide all show transformed classrooms from the same school as the Bored Kids photo a couple of slides ago. These are the same kids, teachers, parents, and same administrators. In this transformed ecosystem, a campus-wide pro-social learning ecosystem, the brains of these learners are thriving through collaborative teamwork where they explore, solve problems, and innovate in every class every day. Alibaba founder Jack Ma says, if we don't change the way we teach, 30 years from now, we will be in trouble. Everything we teach should be different from machines because we cannot teach our kids to compete with machines. We have to teach something unique. Our kids must learn independent thinking, teamwork, and to care for others. These are the soft things that knowledge will not teach you. In our pro-social learning ecosystems, learners and adults actively interact with one another and with their environment. These photos show different interactions that build strong relationships. You can see peer-to-peer and student-teacher communication happening, learner teamwork and collaboration, students teaching one another, learner body language of engagement. See the kids leaning into their group, the smiles, the sharing of common resources, and interactive experiential learning tasks.
So what we see here is that the students are very engaged in what they are doing. Also, what we see that there are 4 different types of spaces here, inside and outside, that all basically garner their attraction. And we see those activities that were different in these 4 spaces. One space that we don't see is these students individually sitting in the rows in the desks. It is a very different kind of space and activity and furnishings that stimulates student engagement in this way.
And we're going to be talking throughout about multisensory learning experiences, which we are seeing in these photos. And as Boris mentioned, we don't see in those straight rows of kids looking at the back of one another's heads. 6 characteristics distinguish pro-social learning ecosystems. And these ecosystems serve as a catalyst for higher levels of student engagement and higher levels of learning. We will explore each one of them, intersecting both learning and space.
So we will explore how the environmental built ecosystem can stimulate the students' engagement and progressive pedagogies and reaching students the higher level of engagement and learning.
The first characteristic of a pro-social learning ecosystem is learners and learning at the center. Learning is no longer a spectator sport, just about teaching someone something. Rather, students become teachers of one another, and they learn through peer-to-peer discourse and by taking ownership and choice over their work. In this photo, not all teams in this classroom are doing the same thing at the same time. The teacher activates student thinking and asks questions that take learners more deeply into their investigation. These third graders are immersed in collaborative problem solving, investigating how they personally use renewable and non-renewable resources. These students are owning their work. Proximity is a key to student-centered learning. Observe the difference in these two photos in the peer-to-peer and student-to-teacher proximity. When a teacher is in the front of the room with all eyes on him or her in the photo on the right, versus the teacher in the center of learning in the photo on the left, who is able to move fluidly from team to check on student progress. There is no doubt that learner teamwork and collaboration increase when students are in close proximity to one another, where they can communicate by looking in one another's faces. Furniture that comes together without gaps gives teams a common work surface for sharing resources. And there is no front or back to the room, so the teacher can easily access all team to support their learning.
So as we look at the proximity in relationship of teachers to the students, it's also important to see how the space can impact and stimulate different activities. And it happens on different levels and different scales. So for example, on the medium scale level, as this library space on the left image is showing, there is a research space below that is right next to the presentation space. And below that presentation space is more kind of focused, deeper reading, quieter, couple of students activity. On the upper floor in this open area is a maker space, which is very open space right next related to possibility of library used for research. So those adjacencies and stimulating those proximities of different activities and different learning experiences. On the right-hand side, it's a smaller scale space that is right next to the classrooms. Again, the proximity. So here is a case of an elementary school that is a good example of explaining why an informal space is important in helping that learner-centered environment. There is a good discussion about what makes institutional space. And one of the conclusions was that when everything is strictly programmed from one activity to another, that gives that activity, that notion of something feeling institutional as you walk through the building, as you inhabit the different spaces. These are the 4 different spaces, different places in an elementary school on different levels, connected inside to outside, connected to the classrooms, designed to be good for the larger scale, medium scale groups, or the individual activities, all in those connections. So inside the classrooms, again, as bottom images are showing, or in the shared spaces as the top left space is showing. And this is what we are thinking when we are explaining the spatial ecosystem that has opportunity of those connections and choices for students to find their way and different learning modes within the whole.
Excellent, yes. So the second characteristic of a pro-social learning ecosystem is a climate of collaboration. Significant portions of our brains are dedicated to connecting with others. Research by Dr. Patricia Kuhl, University of Washington neuroscientist, is clear that our social brain gates human learning. Without the motivation and the information provided by the social brain, where students talk to one another about what they are learning, and when learners see and study the facial and body expressions of each other during communication, learning just doesn't happen as well. When the social brain is engaged and students teach one another, they develop higher level thinking skills, they gain confidence in their thinking processes, and they use higher complexity collaboration. The brain is malleable, and it changes in response to learning experiences. Through those multisensory learning experiences that are interactive, collaborative, our social brain is engaged. And that's when students develop foundational social skills. They learn to co-construct knowledge, which stimulates multiple neural connections in their brains to make stronger memories. Collaborative tasks authentically expose students to content area vocabulary. We learn language by producing language. Taking weekly tests on memorized vocabulary terms, especially in science, those terms learned in isolation, produces minimal retention after the Friday test. Yet students who use content vocabulary over and over in productive student conversations during team-paced inquiry tasks gain high-level vocabulary retention. In every student focus group I lead, elementary, middle, and high, the kids tell me that they learn best when they're able to talk with their peers about what they are learning. They are really clear that they enjoy learning more, they feel that they learn better and get better grades when they work with their peers. Emotions are the filter through which we make memories because emotion and cognition are intertwined. An emotional connection to the content is essential for learning to happen because honestly, we can't learn about something that we don't care about. Neuroscientist Mary Imordino Yang puts it this way: it is neurobiologically impossible to build memories or engage in complex thinking without an emotional connection. So, what if we could measure students' emotional resonance with their learning experiences? As it turns out, we can. It's called immersion neuroscience technology. It starts with a wearable device on student arms that neurobiologically measures in real time the connections that students are making inside their learning experiences. In other words, it measures student immersion or engagement in learning. The key algorithm is attention plus emotional resonance equals immersion. This device uses heart rate to measure the production of oxytocin, the empathy drug associated with human connection. And it's quantified in an immersion quotient that provides data for us relative to matching the learning experiences happening with the immersion of the students individually and as a group in those experiences. Our data is showing that team-based collaboration, a feeling of challenge in the learning experience, and hands-on task result in high levels of student immersion in their learning.
So here's a case of a relatively small-scale spatial ecosystem composed of a variety of different spaces of different scale and character. And we can see how these spaces may help students' attention, both in the terms of experience in the space, in the building, and to the activities that ultimately help their learning. So the space, if you look on the top right, it's an informal presentation area at specific confluence of campus buildings. That is almost like interior amphitheater, but it has very good connection to natural light and the outside. If you look at more closely, you can see that there's a space for the larger group and there's a space for more kind of individual students, maybe shyer at the top that had a little gallery. So now looking back to the bottom left image, you can see that perspective and you can see how this space for larger and smaller group is connected to the informal space in between and to the classroom in the furthest classrooms in the distance. On the bottom right is the space of this presentation informal area that has a small collaboration room, small conference room that is semi-open. On the top left is the ideation classroom, connected again well to the culinary program, that is using this informal space in the middle, that also have a small presentation area with this informal orange seating in the bottom left image. So you're seeing that this kind of composition of 4 different spaces of different character is creating that kind of spatial ecosystem where students can have a more dynamic experience of the space, and it may help their attention, their activities, their overall engagement in learning.
It's actually fostering social interactions.
And the social interactions are very important, as Paige is describing. So what we are looking is to see how can we provide the fabric of spaces that can help social interaction in different modes, from relaxation to very engaged program-based activities. So this image below is showing 4 academies with shared learning spaces of different scale and character in the blue boxes. And these are some examples, as you see on the top and the bottom. The open transparency, connection, visual and physical, and different degrees of openness and privacy, like you see on the top one, from the informal kind of sofa seating with a writing surface to the enclosed conference room, again, visually connected to the balcony outside. So those degrees are very important for the richness of the space that helps attention. More examples from those blue box spaces, as you saw in the diagram before. The connection of the 3 on the right-hand side, again, semi-open, closed to the distance in the view with the distance in the nature. And the shared space on the left has good connection to the classroom surrounding it, but also to the nature and the daylight outside, having that kind of restorative and relaxing aspect as well.
Our third characteristic of a pro-social learning ecosystem is safe and supportive relationships. Relationships are the foundation of learning. In order to learn, the entire campus must feel safe and supportive to all learners. Absent this feeling, students' minds focus on survival, not learning. Essentially, all learners must feel they can bring all of themselves into the school with no judgment, because they are embraced and allowed to be who they really are. Every student deserves to feel respected and free from intimidation, harassment, and bullying. Peers exert an influence on school culture. A pervasive culture of supporting and caring peer relationships is invaluable to learner academic development and well-being. When learners experience meaningful relationships with their peers, they actually feel safe taking the risk to share their thinking with one another, to share their opinions without fear of ridicule. Learners identify more closely with one another when they are engaged in collaborative tasks. The students in my schools used to tell me that when they were continually engaged in team-based learning experiences, solving problems, exploring and innovating, they got to know their peers so much better, and bullying naturally faded. Research shows that close social peer relationships stimulate positive emotions and neuroplasticity. They increase learner engagement by up to 33% and actually decrease disruptive behavior by up to 75%. The power of positive peer relationships. Positive student-teacher relationships are formed and supported every single day. Kids learn best with teachers they know care about them as a person. How teachers speak to and behave towards their students communicates a climate of acceptance, support, and invitation to learn. Very, very critical.
I have learned a lot from Paige and her description of seeing how students become comfortable to each other, how it is a gradual process that is really important for them forming their relationship, so that through those social relationships, they can share their learning and their hits and misses in a way, so that they can progress together. From our understanding, and we are trying to provide spaces that can help. So in this informal space, they can use the glass writing surface to share those experiences and become more comfortable with each other, so that they can be more comfortable when they get more complex project-based tasks.
There's two ways that we can see into students' heads about the meaning that they are making from the work that they are doing. One is what they say, and the other is what they produce. These kids have the opportunity to talk to one another. When we have writable surfaces like these glass walls or whiteboards in the classroom, what we find is that students can visually share their thinking with one another, and it actually enhances the learning experience.
So as we are looking into the safe feeling of students sharing the relationships and sharing their feelings within each other, we need to look at the spatial choices of that ecosystem that we are building. So from our perspective, we can really look at it as a kind of tapestry of spatial choices that students can use. By now, we know that the research has shown that there are differences in the brain from introverts and extroverts, and that they make the relationships differently. They feed differently of the different energies. And in this space here, which is a lobby kind of space, we need to have a space for two students on the right that needs those kind of more privacy to forge their relationships. We know introverts are making relationships more in a smaller group, individual first, before they get comfortable. But you also have the edge where these two couples may be perfectly comfortable in chatting before the beginning of the school at the end. But also there is a space on the second floor for the larger group. You can see that kind of a lounge kind of lobby, which has a little bit of a prospect view to the whole area. So when we look at the spaces of different scales, even the larger ones as this medium-sized to larger lobby, we need to think of that richness of spatial choices so the students can feel safe about sharing their emotions and building their relationships that progress in their well-being in the day, in the social aspects, but also very much in educational aspects.
The fourth characteristic of a pro-social learning ecosystem is flexibility in learning. When learning is easy, we forget it easily. Did you know that the people who struggle the most in their careers are some of the highest achieving folks in those careers? Neuroscientists cite the value of productive struggle for brain growth. Basically, if our brain isn't struggling, it's not learning. So what is flexibility in learning? Instead of one right answer and step-by-step guides kids follow and fill out, flexibility in learning is when students experience ongoing opportunities for choice in their journey to constantly seek new knowledge to add to what they know today. In this photo, each team of students is exploring chemical reactions. They are empowered to choose how they will demonstrate their learning, and they clearly were having fun with their investigation.
So as Paige is describing choice of their education and choice in the journey, we know that environmental and outdoor education can be a powerful stimulation for that. Here is a K-8 environmental STEM school that maximized every opportunity for students for outdoor learning. So what we have heard in the 3.5 years of their operation before this winter, they have been exemplifying and enhancing the ways where students can connect their classes and their lessons from the outdoors to the inside. On the left image is the students in the rain garden taking samples and discussing the science issues. On the top right is the girl that made a model on that table of the rain garden at that scale, fully functional model, and she won the state rewards for that. On the bottom is the example of a student, middle schooler, doing a project on the larger scale filtration systems on the level of the city. And the student used two examples of the cities. On the right-hand side is Seattle, of course. On the left one is Flint. So when we think of relevance of connecting the educational lessons in the class to what is happening in the wider world, this is a lesson that certainly scores very high in that category.
Kids following their passion for deeper and deeper investigation and an authentic product. Awesome.
Here is a case of informal space in a middle school that is connected to the circulation and the classroom in this case. And one of the messages that can be taken from the Welcome to Your World book is to understand in the understanding of circulation, not just a path to get from point A to point B, but a path of different experiences and different spatial discoveries. These are interesting cases because I was giving, in both cases, I was giving a tour to a friend, and the students on the top left were all over them writing and drawing on the board. They didn't mind. The image on the bottom was even more impressive. As you can see from two angles, we are approaching from the image on the right and seeing this group of students seemingly working alone on this project. And we turned around, and yes, sure enough, this group of 6 students was so focused in their work, they didn't even notice us. They have a connection to the classroom, of course, but think that that is a middle school for which often we hear, no, you need constant supervision for middle schoolers because they cannot work alone, they cannot work in a group, and so on and so on. Yet, this was a college scene. This could have been a library on the campus. The students were so focused, so engaged in that learning. One aspect of that is how the space may help. If you think about that space in that kind of bigger scale of different connections, it's a little bit of an alcove connected to the 3-story connection with a good sense of daylighting on 3 sides. So you have a refuge kind of quieter space connecting to a broader prospect, which is making it very good and conducive for more focused activity.
Mm-hmm.
So in the terms of different kind of spaces that can provide and increase that kind of safety for students and work with restorative help, the courtyards, the gardens, the nature has a really powerful effect. And again, you can read it in, if you study biophilia, you'll find it. And Sarah describes it very well in the Welcome to Your World book as well, through the connection to nature. So this is the inserted courtyard in the compact building that can be a restorative space, relaxing space. It can be a scene for the biology classes. It can be placed for that. But it can be also the place for performance of string quartet in this case. What we have learned from neuroscience is that you really remember the space when you engage multisensory experience. And we are seeing that effect here very well. You have the sound, you have the visual, the daylight, you have the smell, you have the tactile quality. You have all of those sensory experience in one space that can help your emotions through the day, enhancing your sense of safety and well-being throughout the day.
Yeah. And it's beautiful too. So the fourth characteristic of a pro-social learning ecosystem is global citizenship. Peter Diamandis, futurist and author of Abundance, describes the incredible times in which we live. News travels the globe in an instant. Music, movies, games, communication, and knowledge are ever available on always connected devices. And a child in the middle of Zimbabwe can Google any information or video conference for free with someone on the other side of the world. Many of our students in the United States are connected worldwide with students in other countries and are doing such amazing learning experiences as making videos on science or math concepts and sharing them with their peers in another country. This global world we live in is something we need to prepare our students to experience, and we need to help them with global citizenship skills. Establishing a cultural fabric within each school that values every person's uniqueness and supports inclusive relationships at the center of campus activity is a defining characteristic of a pro-social learning ecosystem. We need to help students develop skills that are global citizenship skills, such as seeing and understanding other people's perspectives, showing empathy and compassion, making choices that do no harm, showing respect for and valuing diversity, and having the courage to take responsibility for one's actions.
So as we look how the spaces can help, we again come to the notion of the ecosystem of a variety of spaces inside and outside. The natural light is a stimulation on the space on the left. On the right-hand side, this is a little ravine, the storm rain system that takes the water and deals with the increased rain, and it's a sustainable way of organizing the site, but the bridge is an attraction. So we have found that whenever we are able to provide a space that is giving a little bit of specificity to students, it attracts them and they find their way to be relaxed and more comfortable with one another.
The sixth pro-social learning ecosystem characteristic is student agency. Let's look at this photo and think about the student agency here. So imagine with me. This is a science and engineering class. Teams of 4 students are designing and building an elevator that will operate 3 stories high. Each team is designing their own solutions. This team of students that I spoke with excitedly told me how they are addressing this engineering design challenge. They have given each one of themselves a leadership role. And while all of them participate in all aspects of this project design and construction, each one of those aspects has a leader. Their roles are visionary designer, programmer, engineering planner, and historian. Together, they have acquired information through research and study. They are designing and building a structure, programming a motor to run the elevator up and down the 3 stories, and keeping a historical journal that includes their research, resources, designs, problem-solving steps, innovative ideas, missteps, and successes. Their collective excitement overflowed as they talked with me about their innovation, their collective voice, and the choices they considered of how to solve this authentic engineering design problem. Our brains need challenge, and that comes from the rigor inherent in a learning task, the choice students have in the inquiry process, and the opportunities they have to use their voice in presenting their learning. This is student agency. Emotional intelligence, empathy, and the ability to negotiate effectively are leadership components of successful people. Active and collaborative learning tasks that are authentic and meaningful to students at the right level of challenge and rigor naturally inspire their greater effort and enjoyment, again, leading to the development of student agency and lifelong leadership skills.
So Paige has been very clear how at this level students are able to make connections of different pieces. They're able to make connections of different parts and how the whole is composed and how are the things related to each other. So from architectural thinking, now comes the issue, how can we help with the environment so that the students can see how that environment they're inhabiting is a part of the bigger natural setting. In this case, we had the fortune of having Mount Rainier being really present there. So design challenge and the goal was not just to accept it and take it as a symbolic presence, but as a physical aspect of the landscape on a distance from the macro scale, all the way through the details of the smaller inhabiting space for the students in the courtyard for one-on-one activity, chat, or for that kind of quite a congregating. It is really important to connect that space on that macro and micro level so that it is a part of the bigger scene, bigger whole. This is a different high school where a lot of conversation was about maximizing the use of socializing spaces for learning and for informal learning. And we see several cases where that has been happening right from the day the school opened. The image on the top left is a cafeteria in enhancement in extension on the 2nd floor. The commons part is on the right coming down the stairs. But this is the scene that was taken during the class time. These are the students that are working either in small groups or one-on-one because they have been trusted to by their teachers, and they're enjoying these spaces and doing a variety of lessons for a variety of activities. So coming back to what Paige has started with as a learner center environment, this is really a space that has been flexible to accommodate all kinds of different of students' activities. And you can see how that's happening in the shared spaces with different connections of nature, different relationships to light and adjacent spaces. Speaking of the microcosm and of the ecosystem of different scale and character of spaces and activity, this is a good example that illustrates that thinking. This is one of the three commonses of this high school, because the first decision was to break up the commons in smaller areas so the students can make relationships. Paige has been very instrumental how the social relationships are the foundation of students' ability to function and thrive educationally. And that thinking was by and large on the presence of this committee and this high school when they are embarking on replacing their old one with a school that's almost twice bigger. So here we see first that smaller commons. Then we see the activity of a culinary program that's happening down here. Culinary is just off to the right to be part of that common scene of activities. And then we see the path to the library on the second floor with the ASB room and their shared space right on the top. The space on the bottom with that large glazed connection is Career Center, which is right at the intersection of these social spaces. So that's really support for students that's right handy, helping them build relationships. So this is the macrocosm of these kind of different scale and character of spaces all working together to form that successful ecosystem. There is one more aspect that's interesting for us here looking from today, speaking about the maximizing use of space and enhancing that opportunity for students to where they can find safe spots and successful learning. The screen on the top was primarily first designed 5 years ago when this started for ability of school to give training to the teachers, as this is a really good space, good connection to nature. And they have been doing that. So now think about fast forward to 2021 or 22, if you need a hybrid model at some point where you have smaller number of classes, where you want to distance the classes further in different cohorts group, this could be a great space for a class. This could be a great space for the smaller group where they can extend their learning. So that's again speaking about that richness of tapestry of choices for different functions that gives that flexibility of learning and brings you the learner-centered environment in the final count.
And what I also see, Boris, is an authentic experience where the culinary arts students have selected a menu, prepared, and are serving this breakfast to their peers.
And that is a really important point that was tied to their thinking about the relationships and engagement of students from the very beginning. When they started with that, that was at the front of their mind. Just like you saw in the previous slides, when they says we need to find spaces that help students forge relationships, they look to engage students in different activities. So students are engaged in running student cafe in a much different way than they would be in, let's say, average case. They paid particular desire to do that.
And this is where you excel at bringing the educational vision into the space design so that each school is unique and represents the needs of the community. And where the vision was about enhancing social relationships so that learners can learn more successfully, you're just explaining how that happens.
And this is a really important point, as you say, that sense of vision. We need to give a lot of credit to John and the community and the steering committee, because that was just a pleasure striving for that aspiration to come true. So here is a different commons. I said there are three in this high school. This is the second one, which embodies very well the prospect and refuge principle of spatial organization. For those who are not familiar with that principle, it's a biophilic principle that examines our behavior in spaces of smaller scale and larger scale, and how is it related possibly to our comfort and psychology. We mentioned introvert and extrovert students, and the space under this smaller alcove is really good for introverts. They can be close to everybody, but have their smaller conversations. The bigger space is open to their prospect, is a prospect towards that refuge space. That's where your larger groups congregate. But if you think further, that bigger space is like a refuge to that wider prospect that goes in the distance, to the terrace on the outside, to the view in the distance. So that kind of thinking of variety of scales of spaces that are intertwined has been woven through this planning of this large high school, precisely to strive for achieving of that aspiration of helping students make relationships.
And the wayfinding, Boris, is really valuable.
Wayfinding, that's another good spot. It's wayfinding was done in two ways. One of them is very clear, explicit with the numbers. So you got first floor, second floor, you can understand your academy. But there is also the subliminal, that emotional aspect. These brown areas are textured, and every academy has different texture to it. That's somewhat kind of related to the program inside. So there is very clear data information, but is that kind of emotional subliminal information that helps students engage and relate to every place, every spot in the whole campus. And one aspect of this thinking of ecosystem of larger and smaller molecules, in a way, if you wish, is to understand how larger or medium scale spaces can still be designed in a rich way in that regard. So, for example, the image on the left is the beginning of one of the lunch hours, and students are starting to congregate, and you already see two groups claiming the space for the smaller groups right next to the elevator on the left side. The bigger group is going to come in the middle, but the introverts can be on that bench right next to the garden on the right-hand side and enjoy the quieter moment. On the right-hand side, you see those images of kind of, again, a little bit of refuge space, and then your prospect view all the way up to the library on the second floor. It is important to carry the same thinking outside. So the left and the bottom is a sunken garden on that large high school complex with, again, variety of extended lunch socializing spaces. And the top right is upper courtyard that has also the spaces that are designed to be congregating spaces, socializing, extended lunchroom. And we are seeing that in action. From day one, students just gravitated to those spaces. They are very accessible, as you can see. And they are just using them all the time because that's their kind of smaller scale in this regard related to nature that is fulfilling their needs and making them safe within each other on the campus.
So let's talk about a pro-social learning ecosystem. This slide is a classroom ecosystem. Learning changes the brain. It makes new neural connections through experiences, especially multi-sensory experiences. Just like foot traffic wears a pathway in a grassy meadow, our brain makes new neural connections with every new experience. In a pro-social learning ecosystem, brains do not coast listening to a single voice. Instead, there's a collaborative hum of voices throughout the space. Learner brains come alive in their collective exploration of pathways that are engaging to them. So let's look at this pro-social learning ecosystem and see the learners and learning at the center. A climate of collaboration where these kids are harnessing their social brains. Safe and supportive environment. They have flexibility in their learning process. They're practicing citizenships, preparing to be global citizens. And they have agency over their learning. If this space had a voice, whom would it say is valued?
If I put myself as a user in any space, I would come back to the notion of spatial choices. I would say that this space values everybody who has a need for different spatial choice at some time. And this classroom and this image is, I think, excellent example for us to think not only about the campuses and the building as spatial ecosystems, but the classroom itself. We have seen a lot of examples where the thinking of the spatial ecosystem and how it helps learning has been distributed inside and outside. And now let's focus on the classrooms. So this is really worth it of a little bit deeper look at it. It's good if we compare this classroom, let's say, to a plaza. And we can compare it to maybe one of the most famous plazas on medieval times in Siena, in Italy, Campo, where at the edges you have a lot of cafes, you have places for individual or group congregation, and people can find their spot there. So in this edge, in the distance, there is a counter, and you can see the students that like to be individual, they're working on their own tasks, they have their spot there, connecting to the outside. Left for them, there is a table with the 3 students that is at the furniture with a higher elevation. So now you have introduced the spot for the smaller group that's different than the edge before, that also have that perspective from that higher point. So that's a very different spatial experience. Now, if you look at more open area, where sometimes on the plaza you have a different infrastructure, different furniture, we can see that there's a campfire kind of organization right in the middle, conducive to one type of activity. And then you see on the left side, there is a kind of the ottoman and the table that's more for kind of casual interaction with each other in more short-term activities. So now you can see this classroom that can be the same squarish rectangular space is really a spatial ecosystem by the virtue how it was thought through in the terms of furnishing and design of the edges and the center.
It also is an instructionally sound learning ecosystem because the desired and intended learning experiences were discovered and used in the design of the space.
This is probably the best quote that can illustrate or summarize the value and the need of the whole holistic sense of our environment that can influence how we inhabit schools and how the space can help students being more engaged in learning and in the social well-being throughout the day and throughout the years.
Learning makes it to long-term memory when the experiences are active, collaborative, joyful, experiential, and are in inviting spaces. That's the multisensory experiences that we've been talking throughout this time, is how multisensory spaces, multisensory learning experiences actually enhance memory. A friend of mine, a neuroscientist, Melina Unkefer, says, memory is the residue of experience. Active learning experiences leave residue that make it to our long-term memory and stay with us. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us.